Thanks, Brian. Good job, man. That's one of those new features in Angular 9 that not a lot of people were aware of. I appreciate Brian being so thorough about it. He really dug into Angular 9 and did a great job blogging about it and speaking about it with the community. So we're going to take a minute. We're going to invite Brian, all the last few speakers, back to the stage to do a Q&A session. So we're going to go to the "we'll be back soon" sign, and we'll be back in a few minutes. Thanks.
Can you guys hear me okay?
Yeah, we can hear you good. How you doing? Everybody, how you doing? Can you hear me? You guys hear me okay?
Yeah.
All right. Not everyone at once. Not everyone at once. All right. Brian, you hear me good?
I can hear you, Aaron.
All right. So everyone really liked your talks. I don't know if you guys were watching the chat, but your talks were popular, okay? All right. So we got some questions. First question, it's like by far the most upvoted. Maybe it's because it's been out there the longest. This is, what are the downsides of Angular Universal? I'm guessing that's going to Wagner. So Wagner, you would need to unmute and answer that. I could tell you some downsides, but I'm at least slightly biased. Does anyone want to speak to the downsides of Angular Universal?
I mean, there are always downsides to, there are always trade-offs, I should say, with any design choice that you're making. So server-side rendering does incur trade-offs in that, for example, like you can't just use the DOM APIs willy-nilly. You can't do like get bound and client rect or get computed style and things like that. Mm-hmm. It's harder to respond to different size viewports, right? So for mobile devices versus desktops, that's something that you just can't always know the size of the viewport on the server.
True.
Obviously, there's infrastructure costs in doing server-side rendering versus doing purely client-side rendering, and other things like that.
Yeah. Wagner, the question was the downsides to Angular Universal. It was like the most upvoted question. You wanna chime in?
Yeah, I think Jeremy actually nailed it.
Yeah.
It's really taking the cost that a user would be experiencing with like all the scripting going on in the browser, and you're offloading that to your server. So there's more work on the server, less work on the client. And so you want to get a balance there.
Yeah. So I'm just going to say this real quick. One of you is typing like a wildfire, and it's really loud. You got one of those clickety-clack keyboards.
Not me.
So just be aware that you're unmuted. So
I think it might be Deborah.
Deborah? Okay. So next question. This one's for Jeremy. Jeremy, how do you determine when to decompose? Once you start to see similar reuse, abstracting, decomposing too early has kicked my team in the rear.
Yeah, so this is a difficult thing, and it's one of the main skills that people will develop over the course of their career. It's a general rule of thumb is build something once just as you need it, and then the second time you build it, maybe there's some duplication, and then when you get to the third time, that's when you have to step back and extract things out. It's pretty different depending on whether or not you're building a library versus just for an application, because if you are building for an application, you generally just want to do the minimum thing you need to do to launch some feature or fix some issue. But in a library space, you do more want to be very deliberate about the API surfaces you're making available and the different parts you're making available. That's very much of a non-answer. It really does depend on a case-by-case basis. You just have to look at
I think
what you're building.
I think it depends is usually the right answer. So I think it was a good answer. Next question. Thanks, Jeremy. Are there any standard tools to test web Aria accessibility in web applications? I'm guessing this is for Jeremy as well.
Yeah, there are tools out there. So Lighthouse has an accessibility audit, and Axe by DQ is a really great accessibility linter. And you also can just write unit tests and end-to-end tests like you would for any other feature for accessibility as well. Things like Axe and Lighthouse, they do a very good job at what I call accessibility linting, which is to tell you when something is obviously wrong, but they don't give you the ability to say something is definitely correct, in the same way that a linter doesn't tell if your code is correct. There's really, unfortunately, when it comes to like screen readers and assistive technology, no replacement for manual testing today. There's no tooling I've seen out there that covers automated testing for a screen reader on top of an operating system, because it's a pretty complicated thing to deal with, because you have to be able to drive interactions at the operating system level rather than just the browser level.
Right. Okay. Thanks, man. So this one I think is also for Wagner. What if someone has some HTTP API calls? How do I make that work with Angular Universal?
So are the HTTP API calls going on in your components? Is that the question? Or is it something that has to happen as a response to a user interaction?
Yes. I don't know. I'm just asking the question I got. I don't know.
So if it's happening like just to generate your components, then that's totally okay. It'll render just fine, the same way that it does when it's being rendered server side. If it's happening as a result of user interactions, you'll probably still need to have a server up so that when the user does make that interaction, it'll have a server to contact.
Gotcha.
But if that API is something else, like unrelated to your app, then it'll be handled the same way it would be in a regular case. Gotcha.
Cool. All right. So I guess this is where I'm going to let Wagner take this, and I may follow up. What are some of the key differences between Scully and the new Angular Universal pre-renderer? What should we consider when choosing between the two? I'm gonna let Wagner go first.
I'm honestly not super familiar with Scully. There's a lot of other pre-rendering APIs out there. The biggest benefit, though, to using the pre-render builder that we wrote recently is that it's so close to Angular's tooling. It really uses all the tools that are meant to be used to do this correctly, and it's parallelized. So I'm not sure if Scully is parallelized, but yeah, so just the performance is going to be great.
So I'll say, and I'm trying to be friendly, I'll say Scully is parallelized as well. It's just, having worked on a universal app before, Scully's just Angular, whereas universal is Angular, but like super focused in like dodging a lot of like things that people regularly do. So I think I don't know. I think Scully may be a little bit easier to keep running, but I'm not positive on that. But I'm sure Wagner and I will have to grab beers one night and talk it through. So yeah. All right. I'm going to go to my next question, and this one's back to Jeremy. Jeremy, is it good practice about switching light dark themes in components? Is there a good practice? Sorry. Is there good practice for theme switching?
Yeah, it depends on your use case, right? So it depends on your requirements, right? So if you want to like absolutely minimize your CSS payload size that's on the browser at any given time, you're probably going to want to be swapping style sheets. And that's basically like either changing the href on a link element or swapping out link elements to like totally change style sheets. Alternatively, if you don't mind loading different style sheets at the same multiple styles at the same time, you can use like CSS classes to toggle between dark themes. CSS variables are something you could do with this. Again, CSS with in more modern browsers, and base that on some class, but that's going to require you to build your theming around CSS variables. There's the new media queries for like prefers light theme, prefers dark theme. I see those as being something you would want to decide to use if you are okay with having all of your styles on the client at the same time, because media queries require like both sets of styles to be there. Whereas if it's separate from that, you have control over which styles to load at which time.
Gotcha. Okay. I'm going off vote counts here, by the way. Next one up for Wagner again. We've got, what is the best strategy for migrating large existing Angular applications to using Angular universal pre-rendering?
So generally, if you already have a pre-existing version of the Angular universal schematic installed, you can use ng-update. ng-add will take care of most of the work for you, creating some files and updating some others, like your package.json. But if you don't have Angular routing already installed in that big project, I would recommend installing it first so that when you do add the universal schematic, it can make changes to your routing module as well.
So what if I don't use universal today? What's the easiest way to add it into a giant Angular app?
Yeah, so you just want to run that ng-add at ng-universal/express engine. That would take care of creating the files that you need for server-side rendering and updating your other files to get you up to speed.
Gotcha. Cool. All right. Another question for Wagner. Can I use universal for only part of my app, like a specific page or component?
I believe you can. I'm not sure if there's any restriction around that. The schematic would be installed and make changes to some core files. So I do think it would have effects on your whole application. But if I understand correctly, do they mean they want to render some things client side and other things server side?
No, I mean, I'm guessing that's what they're saying, but they're specifically asking, can they render just a component?
I don't believe there's support around that now. I actually think this is something that we've been discussing for a long time in the universal community, but that might be a better question for Minko if there's a Q&A session coming up later.
Yeah, no, he'll be here. We'll ask Minko. Good call. Yeah. All right, next one. How would I18N work with Angular universal pre-rendering? Would it generate the same 800 files for each locale?
I believe it would. Currently, I think there's an issue with the compiler generating some JSON files in IETNN. I'm not 100% sure on that, so take that with a grain of salt. But yeah, I believe it'll render like basically the exact same way that server-side rendering is happening. It's doing the same work just at build time instead of with a request. So nothing should change. If it was working before with server-side rendering, it'll continue to work with pre-rendering.
Keep working. Cool. Good to know. Wow, I'm going to try and, I'm done. I'm moving down. All right. Oh, actually, my list is totally out of order. Okay, sorry. The top question is for Deborah. Sorry, Deborah. The whole list just restored. Okay, Deborah. How do I handle negative scenarios in concat map? Let's say I have 3 API calls in sequence, and we need to unsubscribe from all the requests if any one of the sequence calls fails. Now, nothing like being put on the spot in the Q&A panel.
Well, with
would you use like an exhaust map with a catch error? I don't know.
Yeah, definitely a catch error would catch any error, and it would stop the rest of the processing at that point. What might be best for that kind of question is to maybe work up a little stack blitz of more specifically what your code is trying to do, and then post me a link to it on Twitter, and then I could look at it more closely, exactly what you're trying to do with that. But
Pratik, if you want to reach out to Deborah, sounds like you send her a stack blitz or a gist, and she'll take a look at it. Next question, also for Deborah. A little bit on the spot, Deborah. So I don't know if you know this, the stream cut out a little bit because you're so popular. It kind of died in the middle of your talk for a second. So someone is asking, Deborah, can you please explain again switch map operator? Like, you could do the QA panel version without any slides. Just do your best.
Yeah, I'm really bummed that about half of my talk sort of just disappeared. I'm hoping that they came out okay on the video that was recorded, and that you'll be able to watch it.
Yeah, it'll be online. It definitely got recorded.
It definitely got recorded. Okay, good. Yeah. But the short version of switch map is that what it does is it immediately cancels any prior requests before doing the next one. So say you had someone picking a set of items from the left to show the data on the right, and they picked hammer, no ring. What would happen with concat map or merge map is it would go get each of those. With switch map, it actually cancels the first one. So if the user picked the first item, then the second item, then the third item, when they picked the second item, it would cancel the request for the first one. When they clicked the third one, it would cancel the request for the second one. And so it would only actually return the last one that they picked. So the key difference between switch map and the other ones is that it will cancel any current inner observables from executing, so that it is focused on always the most recent thing that happened. So it's really good to use in any case, like a type ahead case where you don't care anymore about your prior get because now they've typed more characters and now you want to go get that request. Or in a case like the first one that I suggested, that the user could pick, I wanted the hat, no, I want the scarf. And then you want to ensure that you're only getting the actual last one that they picked. So I'm hoping that was short and sweet.
Yeah, if you have more questions, Deborah and I, we've talked about this a lot, so you can reach out to Deborah online, ask her questions, and I know she's fantastic at helping people through these questions. So
yeah, Twitter is a really good place to reach out.
Okay, perfect. And you're just at Deborah Kurata?
Correct.
Okay, Perfect. All right, next question is for Brian, and it's a bit tough.
Oh boy.
Take a second before you dive in. So you talked about the three template checking levels, right? And these are all brand new. And obviously, like, if I have a giant app and I just turn it on the most strict one, like, I'm dead. So the question is, what strategy do you recommend to enable the template type checking incrementally, like just to roll it in piece by piece?
Yeah, that's a great question. So certainly if you have a lot of template type errors in your application today and you just enable strict, you're going to try to do an ng build and you're going to get a lot of red squiggly marks in your build. It's going to say you got a problem here, you got a problem there. And so the strategy that I've recommended is that actually go ahead and do that strict and try a build, because that's, first of all, that's going to give you kind of a view into just how many problems you might have with template type errors. And so that'll kind of let you gauge in terms of just how much work is going to need to be done in order to get from basic to full to strict. And so go ahead, go into your tsconfig file, go into the Angular compiler options, enable strict, try a build and see what happens. So try it. And then that'll let you kind of start to plan things out. From there, I think you could start to analyze just what are the different type errors you have and how many they are. And then you could work with your project manager or work as a team to kind of plan through how you want to tackle those issues sprint by sprint. You know, obviously you got to continue feature development and these types of things, but you could start to plan that out in each sprint and say, hey, we're going to tackle these types of errors. And then from there, certainly you want to go back to basic, which is basically the template type checking that we have today with AOT builds in Angular 8, and then go from basic to full and tackle those first. And then once you're on full, then go from full to strict, and that'll help you kind of make that march towards having strict template type checking.
So I guess this is a question for everybody. Do you suspect it'll get harder as time goes? Like, the higher the level you go, the more difficult it's going to be to roll that in, or what's the thoughts? Is the first one the hardest? Is the third one the hardest? They all kind of the same?
I think certainly going to strict is going to be the hardest, because that's where it's going to be doing the most type checking in your templates. So going from basic to full, it does more type checking for you. But I think that's kind of an easy switch. And then going from there to strict, that's where it's going to catch things like $event right now is just an any, right? And now it's going to actually check all of that. It's going to check your pipes. It's going to check all of your DOM references. So that's my opinion. I don't know if Jeremy or Deborah or Wagner have opinions on that. Go ahead and chime in.
Yeah, it's really just a matter of like tackling one at a time, I think. And I don't know if there's anything I can advise beyond that.
Cool.
Yeah, I agree.
Okay, so the next question is for Wagner. Says, is ng universal worth investigating if the contents of my app are completely user role driven? And I'm guessing that means behind a login, probably.
Sorry, could you repeat that?
Oh, yeah, sorry. So is it worth investigating Angular Universal if the contents of my app are completely user role based? And I'm guessing that means that the contents are largely behind a login.
Largely, I would say probably not, because in that case, you're going to have to interact with the server regardless to fetch that user data. So unless there's like a lot of content that is getting rendered on the client that you can cache beforehand and like do some of that work beforehand, you're still going to have to contact the server. So it doesn't really fit the exact use case. I'm sure you could find a way to use it, but again, it's not the ideal case.
Right. Okay. We got one more question. Highest question is, what are the differences between Universal Pre-Render and Scully? Again, I can name a couple because I know you say you're not familiar with it. So
yeah.
So Universal renders in Node, and Scully renders in Chrome. It uses Puppeteer. So that's a massive difference. It means that Universal can be faster.
Yep.
It also means that Scully will be significantly more forgiving. Like, so there's these big trade-offs. Is if you're using Universal for pre-render only, they both run at build time, so they don't have a runtime component. So that's really powerful. Does Universal pre-render have Markdown support for like doing blogs?
Doing blogs?
Like, yeah, you have like Markdown file support.
I don't believe we do.
Okay, so Scully has Markdown file support. But outside of that, they're very similar in that you're just going to write an Angular app. Your Angular app's going to use HTTP client module to get data.
Yep.
It's going to get that data back and render it. So as far as that goes, they're very, very easy and very familiar for Angular developers. So there's a lot of similarity. If you're just talking about pre-rendering, there's a lot of similarity. They both have strengths there. If you're talking about production SSR, Scully doesn't do production SSR. Scully's strictly a build time pre-render. So those are some of the main differences, I would say. Right? Does that sound about right?
Yeah, that sounds good.
Okay.
I think that sounds right, Aaron. I think the key takeaway there is because they're executed in different contexts, some of the things that Jeremy mentioned earlier, like not having access to the window size or the window object and the document, things that you might be relying on in your application today because you're expecting it to run in the context of a browser. When you go to use Angular Universal, you got to be aware of all of that, right? That it's
That's
not
true.
there. And some of those kind of trade-offs that Jeremy mentioned earlier
That's true.
maybe don't exist with Scully
True.
when it comes to doing SSR.
But they're both
I would also say that unless you're using a particular feature inside of Scully that depends on it being run with Puppeteer, then the pre-render builder will be faster because it's not launching a bunch of Chrome instances.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's just Node.
Universal definitely has the ability to run faster. It parallelizes over a lighter process, right? Puppeteer is a heavier process, so I agree.
Yep.
Okay,
That's
that's kind of our...